This may very well be the first recording of a lied by Wolf where the harpsichord is utilized instead of a piano. However, I would say that doing this is not really any different than harpsichord repertory being performed on the piano, with the only difference really being that we're used to the latter but not to the former. Now, in order to play the piano part on the harpsichord, I had to make a few changes. So if you're following this with the score, you will notice that while the first section, I pretty much play what is there, except that sometimes I will fill in the chords a little bit with more notes. The middle section, I change quite a lot. Also, you will notice that there's a lot more arpeggiation of the chords, and obviously I'm doing this because arpeggiating on the harpsichord means using the instrument's resonance to create shades of dynamics, subtle shades of dynamics. And also, if you think about it, this piece was not really written for the modern piano, but more on this later. Another aspect of the performance I would like to highlight is the fact that the harpsichord is tuned to Kirnberger III. This is a circulating unequal temperament or well temperament, and what this means is that all the keys are playable, just like in equal temperament. However, each key has its own kind of flavor, its own identity. This is something, of course, unlike equal temperament where all keys sound the same. Now, it's probably going to be very easy to look at this recording as something that is really not what Wolf had in mind. And of course, if you think about the fact that it's performed on the harpsichord, that is true. However, in many respects, I would say that this recording may actually be closer to what Wolf may have had in mind in other respects, because something that we really don't think about is the fact that the way we normally perform 19th century music nowadays is radically different from how it would have been performed in the 19th century. And there are many reasons for this. Let's start with the choice of instrument. As I said a couple of minutes ago, this music was not really written for the modern piano. Well, okay, so what are the differences? Actually, there are quite a few. If you look at the type of piano that Wolf would have known, the Viennese pianos of the late 19th century were the most different pianos of that era compared to the modern instruments. They are different in terms of the touch, which is much, much lighter, and it really is indebted to the pianos of the early 19th century. But also what happens is you have an instrument that is a lot mellower in terms of sound. This is, of course, going to affect the response of the singer, who doesn't have to sing loudly in order to project over the instrument. And in addition to this, you have an instrument that is also much more resonant, especially in terms of the upper harmonics. There are a lot more overtones because of its construction, and the sound, as I said, is mellower, but also much, much warmer. It is a very different sound to the modern piano. In addition, the registers of a Viennese 19th century, late 19th century piano are also very different from each other. So you don't have this kind of uniform sound that you get on a modern instrument. Another aspect has to do with the tuning. I am using an unequal circulating temperament. And while what I am choosing is an 18th century type, so it's a little more flavorful than perhaps what Wolf would have in mind, or perhaps what he would have been familiar with. However, it is very important to realize that this music would not have been performed in equal temperament. And this is very crucial for this piece, because if you think about it, we have a piece whose first section, the first and the last section that comes back, are almost firmly rooted in A minor, whereas the middle section is exploring all sorts of far-fetched tonalities. This is, of course, part of what the text is also portraying, with the first section being firmly rooted in reality, while the second section, the protagonist is thinking about the person who has left her. And as she's thinking about this and having all of these different thoughts about her situations, the music is moving from one exotic tonality to another. And while in modern performances, you don't really hear this, in this performance, you will notice that every few bars that the quality changes. We have totally different colors for each one of these remote keys that Wolf is exploring. So this is very fundamental to this piece, and it's something that we totally lose in modern performances. The other aspect I would like to mention here is the vocal performance, and this is something that is still, I would say, a little controversial nowadays. And it's mostly controversial because we like to think that our modern way of performing was the way it has always been done. This is actually completely untrue, and there are many ways of realizing how different things were done at that time. The first thing that we have, of course, is treatises of the time. And if you read 19th century treatises, you find that even vocal production was completely different. You find many treatises talking about a vocal production that highlighted a high larynx and low soft palate, which of course produces a very different timbre to modern singers, because basically this is the opposite of what is encouraged today. The other aspect that you will find, of course, is the notion of vibrato being used only as an ornament, but not used continuously. We know that this was done for instruments, but this is actually also how they looked at vocal performance. And as a matter of fact, continuous vibrato, if the singer, in other words, was always singing with vibrato, was actually regarded as a fault, as something that one should work towards eliminating from their way of singing. Vibrato was an ornament that was supposed to be used only in specific cases, but very, very rarely, not continuously. And as a matter of fact, as late as 1914, in her vocal treatise, the singer Lili Lehmann still says that vibrato is one of the main faults of singing and one of the most difficult ones to fix if one has acquired the habit. Now, in addition to treatises, of course, there are also recordings. So if you listen to the very early recordings that we have from the early 20th century, singers like Adelina Patti, you will notice that she's using almost no vibrato at all. And what one would call the slight vibrato in her voice is really, really a very, very tiny shimmer. It has nothing to do with the wide vibrato that we use now. And of course, there are also recordings of Lili Lehmann that I just mentioned, her treatise. You hear the same thing. So in other words, when in this performance you will notice that vibrato is used sparingly, but not continuously, this is actually how it would have been done in the 19th century. The way we sing Wolf now has really absolutely nothing to do with the way Wolf would have been performed during his lifetime. And it is very probable that as we may think that 19th century vocal delivery is not very desirable, or it sounds strange to us, you have to imagine that for the 19th century musicians, our way of singing would have sounded strange, and perhaps also, judging from what we read on the treatises, faulty. One thing that was characteristic of 19th century performance practice that you will not hear in this performance is portamento. Portamento meaning sliding from one note to another, rather than singing one note and then going on to the next one. You slide in between. Now, with this particular technique, this was also used in terms of an expressive device, just like vibrato was used as an expressive device. However, Kendall felt, and I agree with her, that in this particular piece, thinking about who the protagonist is in this piece, Portamento simply didn't seem to fit the mood. Whether this is how a 19th century performer would have felt, we don't know. But we had to perform this piece in a way that made sense to us, in a way that was convincing to us, and so that we could present to you a convincing performance. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the performance.